It is possible to become free from debt, financial worry, your boss, and your zip code. You can start living a life you love, but first, you need to find your freedom. Using financial independence and lifestyle design principles, you can create the life of your dreams now. There are many paths to freedom, and that is what this podcast is all about. My name is Becky from 20free.co, and I am the host of the Find Your Freedom podcast. Today's interview is with Miss Maud, a Canadian woman in her early 30s who's documenting her family's journey to reaching financial independence by 2025, which is 8 years from the time she started the Modest Millionaires blog. Her and Mr. Maud are parents to 2 young children and have made it a priority to increase the amount of time they get to spend with their kids along the journey by arranging for flexible work options as well as planning to take several weeks of unpaid leave per year. They live in a medium-sized town in the province of Quebec, and Miss Maud writes her blog in both French and English to document their journey. Her main objective of blogging is that by sharing the knowledge her family gains to reach this goal, she may be able to help other people establish and reach their own financial objectives in a way that helps increase balance in their lives. In this interview, Miss Maud talks to me about her personal financial story as well as how she negotiated a full-time work-from-home position in her government job. We discussed the step-by-step process for preparing to ask, having the first conversation, and making a formal proposal to take your job remote. Welcome to Find Your Freedom, Miss Maud.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So let's start with talking about your background. Tell me a little bit about how your personal experiences have shaped your perspectives on money and life.
A couple of big experiences that come to mind when I think about money and growing up. One is when I was really young, my parents bought like an older house and they tore it down to build a bigger house and something new. They were pretty young, like early 20s. They had 3 kids and they really invested into this project thinking, this is great, we'll tear this down and we'll build on this asset that we could eventually sell and then we'll have our forever home. What happens is once they finished building the house, it was the fall of 1990s, I think, but it was a financial crisis that hit pretty badly the housing market, especially in our area of the world. And they were kind of stuck. And while I was so young that I don't really remember this, what I do remember is that they ended up not selling the house and pivoting in that moment and kind of deciding to just double down and work hard and manage to pay those daily expenses. So I remember my dad working all day and then going to deliver pizza in the evenings after he had dinner with us. My mom, in a very Canadian fashion, she'd go off to Tim Hortons at night and work the night owl hours. And then she'd go off to her daily job as a public servant. What was really important for them was to give us some financial stability. They grew up not having that and moving around a lot. So to them, it was important that once they had their plan, they would double down and make sure that we didn't see all that area of uncomfort and keep us feeling secure. So I had a lot of lessons there about hustling. You could see a lot of various ways where they weren't depending on one source of income. They were going all out. And I got a lot of privilege in the sense of getting that financial stability and then seeing them go from there. My dad worked in the food industry, bringing the food into the supermarkets and delis and stuff. And this is an area where the business changes a lot. So he suffered a lot of layoffs and then he'd pivot and find another job. When I was about 7 or 9 years old, I remember that at one point he didn't have his job. All I knew is that right now dad didn't have a job, but they didn't seem so stressed. They were finally at a place of more stability. From my perspective as a kid, I didn't even know what was going on in the background. All I knew was that my dad was coming to pick me up at school on his bike every evening. And I liked that. It was fun. And he didn't seem so stressed. I knew there was talk of money in the evenings, but it wasn't anything where I felt worried. But in the background, what was going on is that my dad decided to pivot and create his own business. He was going to get his own contracts and do the in-between to the grocers and the food industry. And that eventually became a successful business where he made enough money to like support our family. It was never like a huge business, but it was enough. What I saw from that was the freedom that he gained from making that choice. He was here at our house when we were eating lunch because he adjusted his schedule for it. There would be a few like longer weekends where he'd have to work, but it was always in the idea of spending time with us, having his freedom. Before I retired, he was going off to play golf in the morning, and then he'd do like his work in the afternoon, and sometimes he'd work at night in the evenings, but it was all fitting work into his life. That left me with a lot of lessons in the sense of how to gain freedom. Also, on that subject, my mom at that moment, because he did not have access to a pension fund, she started investing a portion of his money. There were a few lessons that came out of this where they did bad choices at times with bad advisors, and she decided to educate herself on investments, and she always made it a priority for her to teach us. It's important to know the background. Like, even if you decide to go with an investment company, you need to understand it because there are fees. You can make a small choice that results in a lot of lost cost or lost potential. So that we were really privileged to have a financial education growing up in that sense.
Thank you for that background. I really connected with what you said about how your dad made his work fit around his life instead of his life fit around his work. And I can see how that influenced you. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in this interview of how you've created your own lifestyle design. And it's really great to hear that your parents gave you a background in personal finances. I know that there's a lot of people who don't get that until they're spending their own money. We kind of have to learn the lessons the hard way. So I wanted to ask, in your early financial life, when you were first making money, first figuring out how to spend it, what did that look like for you? Were you still making some mistakes, or did you feel pretty secure in the financial background that you had learned from your mother?
Once I started really like making money, I guess like in my teen years, I was obsessed with traveling. We did a few trips growing up, like going down to Florida and once in Mexico. But I wanted more, and there were some opportunities in high school. Like I could go to Cuba for 3 weeks and do some community work as well. And I was super excited. And my mom said, well, you have to work for it and save your money and all this. Part of that deal was I had to put a percentage in my RRSPs, which is the equivalent, I think, of 401ks in the United States, because she wanted to encourage that in me. So what I would do is I would work really hard a small period of time, and then I would travel for like 3 weeks, a couple of weeks, a couple of years later. I would spend all my money on the travel, except that little portion that would go aside, and then I'd get a bit stressed and then work again. So I kind of like had that mentality, worked super hard and then take a break. And a perfect candidate for like mini retirements eventually, but it was my focus. And then what happened is when I went off to college, the deal was I could either stay home, or if I would move out to another city, I would have to pay for my cost of living. My parents were okay covering my tuition and the books, but since I had that option and I could stay home, and they wanted to encourage me to have that financial responsibility, I would need to pay for the cost of living. So there was this program I wanted to do in Montreal, which is 2 hours away from where I live. And I decided I wanted to go there. So I would have to pay for my cost of living. And I was still obsessed with travel abroad. Like the program itself was business in 3 languages, French, English, and Spanish. And it included 1 semester abroad. So that was the main idea. It was about traveling and experiencing the world. But at that point, even though I was working almost full-time hours and saving up for travel and paying for my cost of living, it just didn't really work. So I ended up still going in debt, even though my tuition was paid for and my books. I took on about $20,000 to $25,000 in debt, which isn't so bad, but once I graduated, it was 2010, so that was right after the recession. Jobs were harder to find. It was quite stressful having that debt on top of everything else. But what helped me was that my mom forced me to keep putting on the RRSP, the 10 to 15% of my income. So while I had $25,000 of like student debt and consumer debt, I did have about like $15,000 in my RRSPs. And I could access that money to buy a property through a program that we have here where you have like 15 years to put back the money so you don't get taxed on that money. And that helped me and Mr. Mod buy our first property. And we rolled my debt into our mortgage to get a lower interest rate. Really, I paid that off really quickly in about a year and a half once I had my first job. And that's when I really discovered the power of paying off debt faster. And we kind of got on the train of like thinking, well, if we have any increases in our salaries, let's just pay off more of our mortgage and we'll eventually invest in real estate. So it was a lesson in learning of, in the sense of like learning how to pay off debt, but also of learning that there's a balance that you kind of have to find. I can't just spend all my money on travel and then, because you can end up in a place where you're really feeling stuck. You don't really know what the next years, especially these current times, you don't really know what the next month or week can be like. So it really taught me the value of financial security that my parents tried to kind of teach me, but I lived it through those college years of having less money and then taking on more and more debt, feeling a bit more anxiety, the level of anxiety increasing as I took on more.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that experience. I really connected with how you got a financial education from your parents and still made some financial mistakes early on in your financial life. I did the same thing. My parents said, don't go into debt to go to college. And I went $100,000 into debt to go to college. So, and the anxiety building when you get into debt is something that I think anyone who's had even a couple $1,000s, but certainly 5 figures or more of debt can be a really good, like, pivotal learning experience to feel that and know that you don't want to feel that way anymore in the future. Do you think that that was a bit of a catalyst for your journey into financial independence?
Absolutely. The how we found financial independence directly came from that idea of continuing to put more on the mortgage. I was researching like how to pay off a mortgage quickly, and that's when I stumbled on the Mr. Money Mustache's website. At that point, I was in a job that I wasn't really enjoying. It was more of a take this position so that I can enter an organization and try to move and find something I like. So my days were long, and it was at that moment that I found this idea, and I was like, this is what I'm working for. Like, we had this idea of we can invest in real estate, find some income coming in our way that was independent on a job. We learned about index funds at this point and so on. But it definitely was triggered by understanding how we could pay off debt, at what pace, what impact this had on our interest rate, the amount of interest we'd have to pay in the long run, but also the compound interest effect if we were investing in index funds and diversifying that. So it's definitely the debt that played a huge part in this, while combined with my childhood experience of seeing my dad find freedom in how he adapted his work and how he adjusted to face how the industry was changing a lot. He found his own stability by pivoting in this way.
So we kind of already covered how you learned about financial independence, right? When you learned about it, did you have a pitch for your husband where you said, this is what I want to do? I'd like for us to not only pay off our mortgage fast like you were already doing, but potentially retire earlier, much earlier than normal.
Absolutely. And what's funny between me and Mr. Mod is that I'm very spontaneous while he's very calculated, and he likes to think things through before acting. So we balance ourselves really good in that sense, where I might do something too fast and it'll slow me down. So you could just kind of see how the pitch goes in that sense. First, it's like hitting a wall a bit, and he's like, really, people retiring that young, like it happens. So that was tricky at first, and then I think it was around 2012 I started reading all of his blog posts, and he kind of read a few, so he liked the idea and was like, yeah, I don't know how it would work, and he was kind of not as obsessed, let's use this word, as I was, and I was like reading this all the time, and he was in a much busier job at the time too, so I had time in the day to read a bit on this. a year after, I was like, okay, I'm going to make my own plan. It's going to take me 15 years and I'll have this much. And then he kind of felt left out and was like, wait, let me see. So he's kind of looking at the numbers. And that's around the time when I got pregnant and we had our first child. It's when I was in my maternity leave that he got super obsessed because he had to go back to work. I had a full year with our son at home. And he went really intense and like learning about index funds, and like he adjusted the plan and changed it to like 10 years instead of 15, and he got really on board. So he kind of had to live his own experience and like see his own values of digging more into it to really get on board. So despite all my pitch and just saying yes, like at one point I was like, okay, I'm doing this on my own, so it's good and we'll just make it work. And that's when he eventually got himself on board and helped me make it even better.
So in 2012 or so, you found Mr. Money Mustache. Around what age were you then?
I was 2012, 20, 24, 25. Yeah, mid 20s.
Okay. And then this started becoming kind of a group effort when you had your first child. Was that a year or two later? What was the timeline on that when he got on board?
Yes, exactly. So that was 2014. So I was 26, 27. Yeah.
Okay, great. And what was your initial timeline? You said you had that 15 years and then you brought it down to 10. So you were looking at retiring around 2025?
Yes, I initially at 2030 was my timeline. And then when he got on board, we built it up to 2025. And a couple of things came into play where it could have been faster, but deciding to have our kids young, we could have decided to wait until after we reached 5. But there were a few different reasons that came into play. Like Mr. Mod's parents are a bit older, and we wanted them to be young enough to be able to participate in our kids' lives as they were young. And with my background of knowing that we wanted more time with them when they were young and the freedom of having my dad there for lunches and stuff, I really wanted to adapt our journey to have more time with them as they grow up. So we adjusted our plan to account for perhaps summers off with them once they started school, some travel. We wanted to do a few longer term trips with them as they grow up. And we decided we kind of accounted for it by removing any salary increases from our projections. So that way we could cut down like five weeks off per year, up to 3 months off per year during those 10 years of our plan, which was like 2015 to 2025.
So I'd love to dive in more about how specifically you designed your lifestyle in tandem with pursuing financial independence and early retirement, because I feel like very commonly the stories that we hear in the FIRE movement space is usually from people who don't have children and from people who want to work as hard as possible and make as much money as possible for as short of a period of time. So it's like a really condensed version of your normal retirement plan: work 9 to 5 until 65. Well, what if you could work 80 hours a week and do all these things to get these promotions and work really, really hard, but not potentially maybe enjoy it so much, only for say 10 or 15 years, and then you could retire and have all this time. But what I think is really cool from your perspective is that you didn't participate in that deferred life plan either. It's a shorter term deferred life plan, but you would have had to defer either spending time with your children or even having kids to pursue it in that traditional FIRE sense. So what other things did you do? I'd love for you to elaborate on being able to take some time off from work to spend with the kids. And I'd also love for you to talk about how you managed to create a career where you can work from home and therefore have a more flexible remote work arrangement.
One thing that was cool about like being in this financial independence community or like reading on different blogs is that I eventually got the sense that people pursuing financial independence got awesome opportunities farther ahead. One person in particular is Mad Fientist, which I was listening to all his new podcast, and he was still working back in those days before he retired. He was working from home. He was not even living in the same country as his employer. And I thought that was super cool. I was like, hey, that's a cool opportunity. And I was reading up a lot on the Mr. Money Mustache forums, and they have yearly threads of the cohorts that are supposed to take to fire in the year. And it is fascinating to see how many people fall into kind of that one more year syndrome, but in an even more positive turn of events, their employers tend to offer them a reason that creates that attraction to stay one more year. And oftentimes that's working from home, taking some paid time off, or just time off that's a lot more flexible. So because they have finally all that FU money, and they've reached this point where they're comfortable and they're like, okay, I'm ready to go, they get offered awesome opportunity, and that makes their life so much better. And I kept thinking how this could apply now in my life or in the next couple of years. And I thought to myself, once my kids go to school, it would make so much sense for me to work from home. They could come and have lunch at home. They wouldn't have to go to after school care, which would save us money and allow more time for them to feel relaxed at home and to spend more time with us. And I thought, okay, well, how can I find this opportunity in my own work? And anytime I had an opportunity to switch position or apply for a position, I would ask myself, does this give me autonomy? Would I need to be at meetings daily? Would I need to meet with clients? Is there a lot of opportunity for me to actually pivot this into asking for more time working at home? At that time, I think in 2014, I had switched role, and I specifically chose in a group where there was more research and there was more self-directed work. And I started doing a few days at home even while I was pregnant with my son. And the last couple of weeks, I did them entirely at home because of the pregnancy, and it was easier, and the work was really flexible in that sense. And then even after I had my son, I came back pregnant again at work. So in Canada, we have like a full year of maternity leave. So I pretty much went back 4 months between my two maternity leaves. So I worked a lot at home again. And I kept showing up and showing that I was doing the work well. And that led me to kind of seeing how work from home would keep working. So in my mind, I would keep increasing the days. So going from 1 day a week to 2 days a week. And then I kind of had that plan in mind that maybe Mr. Mod would do 2 days as well. Eventually got one, and then we'd be almost there. We'd almost have our full week. Eventually, I think I was back almost a year from my second maternity leave. And a few things happened in my organization. One was there was renovations coming up in the building, and they needed to hire a lot of new people for a new project that was going on. So they were missing out on office spaces. At the same time, we had a new head of the organization that was really focused on employee wellness. So there was a nice shift in the culture of the organization where they put priority on employees performing well when they are happy, and kind of having that flexibility to go in the gym the afternoon if you want to go during, like, you want to work during lunch. And there was a lot of that idea floating around. It was much earlier than I had intended because my kids were still like 2 under 2, and they weren't in school at all yet. They were in daycare, and we were really burnt out at that time. We had a lot going on in our personal life. And the thing about two parents working and going to work, each traveling about an hour per day, I was really tired of it. I was like, I can't do this. I can't keep doing this for a long time. And then all this new shift that came up kind of made me realize I could probably ask for this earlier than planned because they're missing office space. There is more hours coming up. And I've been doing this position of like autonomous work. I'd pivoted even in roles after my second maternity leave. And it was even more autonomous work where I was doing like calls with clients and stuff, but never presenting into meetings with all my team and stuff. It was mostly with people outside of our organization. So I was in a role that fit well to it. And I eventually worked on doing a proposal and fixing But I think it's mostly knowing that it was a possibility, knowing that people, when they do have a lot of money and like step in the games, they kind of can get good offers because employers are looking to keep the good workers in their organizations. Especially in the organization I work at, it's a lot of older employees were going off on retirement. So good quality younger employees that can stay for a long time, they have the best interest in mind to keep them happy and fulfilled.
So that was a great overview. What I'm hearing is that you crafted your role before you made the ask to go remote so that it was something that was very easily performed from home. And that's something that I think a lot of people now are realizing. We're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. Whether or not their role previously was able to be done from home, a lot of people are having to work from home and are finding out that it can work for their position. I'd love to talk about that in a minute, about how the coronavirus is kind of impacting similar transitions to the one that you had. But the other thing I heard was that you didn't just go into your boss's office one day and say, hey, I want to work from home. You wrote a proposal. So can you tell me a little bit about what this proposal entailed and how you used it to convince your boss to say, okay, you can work from home?
Absolutely. The first time I approached my direct supervisor was a conversation. I thought it was important to test the waters before going fully official with a request. I mentioned that it was going really well. I wanted to increase the time, kind of like tested to see how it was going on her and if my performance was still up to par, and how were things compared to when I was in the office compared to when I was at home in terms of communication. And she was really on board with the idea, and she was really happy with my work from home, and she was like, you can increase as much as you want and it's going well. So from that point on, I started to track really closely the performing compared to when I was at work, and I was completing my cases much faster at home because I could call clients on a whim. I didn't have to go in a find a little closed space instead of my cubicle, and the productivity was just very clear, and I had the stats to support it. So once I had a couple of more weeks and I tweaked my stats a bit, I approached my supervisor with a clearer proposal. At that time, I did not have something on paper. It was just like, I did have like kind of a PowerPoint with stats and stuff, and we discussed it a bit, and she was fully on board. But then what happened is she went to upper management to get approval, and she came back a couple of weeks later and she said, they're not really interested right now. So I was really disappointed because my direct supervisor was on board and very motivated with the idea. And she was like, I could see this happening. I could see you doing this. So I went back. I kept on doing my work, and I thought maybe I'll just keep on doing more side hustling, pivot to that eventually. At that moment, I was talking also to a couple of people that were working remotely. And I heard Jay on the Fire Jill podcast saying that she had approached her employer with a proposal for her own team to get remote work days because they weren't allowed to work remotely at all. And she talked about this proposal and how it was set up. And I mentioned to my supervisor that I'd like the opportunity to present something eventually to upper management because I still thought the idea was feasible and it would work well for us in our time in life with 2 kids under 2 and a lot going on. And she said, okay, I'll see what I can do and I'll come back to you. So knowing that it might be an opportunity, I reached out to one person on the Mr. Money Mustache forums that was working remotely and asking, oh, do you have any tips? And I also reached out to Jay by sending an email to her and saying, hey, I might have a chance to do a proposal. Can I know a bit like how you presented, what information you had in there? And I started drafting something, which I was really happy to have gotten started because once I did get the opportunity to present, I had like a couple of days to prepare. Where she said, he's open to it. There was a push for innovation in our particular sector, and he likes the idea from that sense. So if you can put something together, you can present it to him. So what I did have in my proposal itself was mostly around stats at first. I crafted like Canadian specific stats and also like more general stats where they were showing that remote work was increasing. And I kind of spelled that out and saying the organization has to be ready because, and it's kind of funny looking at it today where where everybody's working remotely right now from my organization. And I was just saying this is more and more common. The new workforce is more attracted to positions where they have the ability to work remotely at times, at least, and even bigger parts of the week. And also from the sense of the organization, the benefits of reduced absenteeism, of having employees that are more motivated, more productive, and happier. And the book Happiness Advantage of Sean Aker describes how a happier workforce has a better tendency to innovate and find new ideas because they are in a more positive mindset and their brain is more open to look at positives and look at opportunity. So I kind of crafted in this way, and then I put like the benefits for the employees. And then I went specifically in my work in addressing every concerns that might come up. So there was the concern of communication as much with the clients as between the team, and a common concern for organizations is maintaining a sense of community in their organization and a community in the team. So I laid out how I would address those concerns and what in my specific position was helpful. And I also had like a specific page that was how my own role fits better into a remote position. Because at the time, a main concern that my organization had was, what if everybody wants to work from home? Which is hilarious looking at it today. But at that time, it was really important to them. And even after I met with upper management and they felt confident about it, my director specifically asked me to address that in my proposal even clearer. So he wanted me to detail it out, why my own position, which was possible to do at this time. And once I went over this with my director, my supervisors, upper management, he was really happy and confident with the idea, and eventually it was approved. But it took several months to actually get it from A to Z. But having a clear proposal and clear reflections on what the concerns of my organization might be really helped solidify that they had confidence in me, and it wasn't more of an idea of like, oh, I'm tired of this, and just like a pivotal moment of like, I'm getting outside of the organization or I'm leaving them. They knew I was doing this with their best interest in mind, while also it being for my best interest at the same time.
Yeah, and I like how you directly addressed things that were benefits to the companies. Similarly to when you're asking for a raise or a promotion, you don't want to focus on like, hey, I need more money. I have things that I want to do this for personally. If you want to work from home, you're not going to say, well, I'd love to spend more time with my kids and not have to commute to my office every day. You want to say, well, you can see how X, Y, and Z would make the company more money or save the company more money or make things better for them in some measurable way. If you end up happier as the employee, that's great. But if that results in a benefit to your employer, then that's really what you want to emphasize, because that's, they're going to be self-interested in whether or not they choose to grant the proposal. And if you can say this is a win-win, but particularly it's a win for you as the employer, that's going to motivate your higher management, your upper management to agree to something that I would say prior to this coronavirus situation was pretty unusual.
Absolutely. And in my position, I'm in a governmental organization. So when you mention negotiating, in my own position, there's no negotiation on salaries. You're in a salary rate, and you have increases that are coming up. The negotiations take place more in the unions, and it's more global. So you're not directly involved in negotiating this. But this perk was fully a negotiation. I was negotiating, so there was all doing it non-confrontationally was so important. Framing it as a win-win situation, that it was good for the organization while being good for me was so, so important. So every tips that are directed to negotiating a better salary can apply to negotiating a proposal or a different perk or some flexibility in your job.
And it's so great to hear you say that you achieved this within a governmental organization, because I can imagine a lot of people hearing this and saying, wow, that would be great, but that wouldn't work for my job or for my company, particularly people who work in maybe the public sector as opposed to the private sector, where there's a little bit more rules and regulations, and they tend to be a little bit slower to adapt to the modernization of technology and how remote work is a complete possibility. That's really encouraging. And I was wondering what you would say to someone who says, I want to work remotely, but it's never been done before in my organization. Even in this situation, they want everyone to come back into the office as soon as possible. It's really not in the culture of the company or the organization.
I've actually seen this firsthand because I'm offering coaching to some people that reach out to me. I've had people reach out specifically to negotiate their working from home agreements because they are being asked back to work. And the employers are really excited about finding back the statu quo and getting back to normalcy. But employees are seeing that they were able to accomplish their work sometimes much more productively from home, and there is that desire. And especially, I'm a questioner, so if I can see I could do something better, and I'm like, well, why would I have to go back? But there's definitely a strategy to approaching your employer with this. It's important to make a plan in the sense of like choosing your roles. If you know you want to move roles, as I did, is reflecting and asking questions. Is there a lot of autonomy? Are the tasks driven into meetings, or is there a lot of in-person need? Kind of like choosing to look for something where you can be self-disciplined and you can do the work from home confidently. So in that sense, when you have a plan in place and you have that idea that you do want to do it from home, you got to keep your eyes open for opportunity and track that productivity is so important. So doing the measurable work of demonstrating that you are accomplishing the work, which is one of the main concerns from supervisors, is that when I don't see my employee, are they still doing the work, or are they just at home chilling and watching Netflix? Or are they working hard? So you want to show that, and you want to show it in a way that's measurable and that your employer can really compare. Working at home is even better than working on site. There's also an important aspect in the sense of never using working from home as an excuse for not getting something done. I've seen this happen when our organization switched to everyone being at home because of the pandemic. I've had a couple of exchanges with colleagues where they were saying, too bad we're not in the office. I would have come to your desk and this would have taken a minute, which I thought was really funny from my end because I was already working from home. So I'm like, yeah, that's not a good excuse. And you absolutely don't want to use that excuse if your plan is to come up to your supervisor and say, hey, I want to keep this thing going up from home. You don't want to have a track record of saying, oh, no, I can't really do this task. Let's pass it on to another colleague that can be in the office. You want to show that you're able to adjust and be flexible in a different and newer way of working, because your supervisor in your organization is probably a bit nervous about this idea of having employees full-time at home, and this is a new way. They're looking back for that normalcy in all these changes. So you want to create what is this new normal for them, and you want to show that it works well. So the tracking is definitely important, not using it as an excuse, and testing the waters as well. Like I did with my supervisor, just going in and saying, hey, how are things going? How can I communicate more clearly when I'm from home? Should we do a regular meeting when I'm working right now at home, or on the couple of days I'm working from home? And that could even be done in an incremental number of days. If they're asking you to come back full time on site, you could say, how about I come back like a couple of days, or I keep doing a couple of days at home, and let's see how this goes for the time being. with the current circumstances, it's okay to say this can help the organization put the measures in place for social distancing. It's okay to use this situation because it's true. Like, there are measures that organizations are trying to wrap their heads around, making more room for employees. They're writing down arrows on the floor, trying to find ways to that people don't cross paths too much and try to space out their employees. So you can use this in your proposal and saying, look, if you have my office space for a few days per week, this has less people on site, and it could be helpful to just implement those measures. So yeah, definitely the tracking, testing, and using really what might be your employer's concerns to adjust your plan and adjust how you will communicate this to your employer, to your direct supervisor, and even to your colleagues.
Yeah, so speaking of colleagues, I loved that rundown on how you can transition your role. Now we almost have a better footing, right? Coming from almost everyone being required to be remote unless they were essential personnel. We have a really strong place to come from where we can point to a past record of working from home and say this was working and it can continue to work into the future. And you also know, this is kind of the other thing, is a lot of times when people think about working from home, they might imagine it to be different than it really is. So now for people who have experience working from home, they know what it's going to be like for them and whether that's an option that they want to pursue. There are several people that I've talked to who thought they would like working from home, and it turned out that they would prefer to return to the office. And that can be for several reasons. I think the one that I hear most often is that for a lot of people, work is a bit of a social activity as well. So I did want to ask about that in terms of how you can connect and interface with your colleagues. How does that work? And have you found any challenges with that between working on site versus working at home?
Personally, for me, since my own role was really more virtual in the sense that I communicated with colleagues that weren't necessarily on the same floor as me, so I communicated more by Skype Messenger or by email or telephone, it didn't change much. I did see a big change in the sense of once everyone was working from home, there were more requests for meetings and which was strange in my mind, which was against the productivity, but it was this idea where people like the connection, and not everyone is designed to really work from home full time. And that used to be one of my tips when someone would ask me, how did you do this? You got to make sure it fits with your personality and how you like to work. So the testing is so important in that sense, kind of phasing it in before just going all out for a remote position. It's very important. Once my colleagues started all working from home and there were more requests for meetings and stuff, I felt kind of comfortable saying no and saying, oh, I'm kind of busy with other stuff. But for me, it didn't change much. And I was dealing a lot with clients outside of the organization. So there was already a lot of phone calls and more remote way of doing things. And I think there's a lot of people that could realize this in their own job, that, and they're probably realizing it now, that the face-to-face interaction was more about socializing, like kind of talking at the water cooler or stopping by to a colleague's desk and just chit-chatting about the weekend and stuff. So it's been nice to see some efforts from organizations in the sense of creating that sense of community. And even in my proposal, I had mentioned a few things that were eventually implemented, like a round table of either by email or in kind of meeting form of like, hey, this is what I'm working on, and keeping everyone kind of informed on what other people were doing and doing more of that chit chatting that you don't necessarily get to do if you're only doing emails or phone calls on a need basis.
I'm glad that you touched on the social aspect of it, because the other thing that I think is a bit of a misconception for people early in their careers is that work has to be everything. It has to be not only, fulfilling job that you're working at, but also a fulfilling social situation. And I think a lot of people who are just breaking into their careers tend to be a little disappointed, or might find that, while it's kind of a default group of people that you spend the most of your time with, if you're working a traditional job that's 9 to 5 and you're working in an office or on site, you spend more time with those people that are your coworkers than you do with your family, typically. And some people find it disappointing that it's not the social atmosphere that they were hoping for. And so when you work from home and you're kind of working more on your own terms, you're actually able to manage your time where you can spend that social time with your family or with people who you're personally friends with rather than kind of professionally acquainted with. And you don't have to expect your job to fill all of those different check boxes that you want out of your life.
Absolutely. And that was a huge thing in my first few months of working from home. My colleagues were like, "Don't you miss it? Is it hard being alone all the time?" And my answer to that was always, I'm kind of right between the spectrum of like introverted and extrovert. So I need a bit of both time, but the opportunity to not have those small interactions during the day made me want to see my friends more and see my family, my extended family more often. And I had the energy and the focus and the concentration in those moments to really enjoy the interaction and just get that right balance. So that was always a way to frame it in saying, well, it depends on your personality. Like if you are fully extrovert, you might go crazy being at home all the time, and just like zooming with people will not be enough. I'm sure a lot of people relate to this, like in these last couple of months, where we can know our level of need of seeing people in person, not just seeing virtual faces.
No, I totally agree with what you're saying. And I noticed, so I left a corporate job where I was typically in the office 3 or 4 days a week. I was working from home or working offsite sometimes as well. But the social interactions that I had there were not with a group of people that I would typically interact with. I mean, it was a bunch of 40 plus, 50 plus year old dads. I work in a male dominated field. I would have preferred to, hang out with my girlfriends or with people that were more around my age. And so I didn't necessarily find myself missing that aspect once I left my job and started working from home, even though I'm extremely extroverted and really need a lot of interaction to be happy. I felt that I was able to get that in other places, so I wasn't feeling lacking. I was actually feeling like I was finding more work-life balance because that social part was feeling better fulfilled, not at the expense of my work anymore.
And that's huge, not at the expense of your work, which is true. Because if you spend a lot of time chit chatting between colleagues in the day, oftentimes the work paid for it. And that's what I could show in my productivity stats and measurement, was that while I was at work, there was a lot of time wasted going from one space to another instead of just doing a conference call, or time chit chatting and having interruptions from colleagues, either for work related reasons or just for chit chatting as well.
Great. So I kind of wanted to go back a little bit before you started thinking about this remote work arrangement with your employer. Did you hit the amount of FU money that you wanted to feel comfortable to negotiate this remote work arrangement, or was it a little bit earlier than you had planned and you decided to go for it anyway?
I actually had not reached my FU amount that I had in mind. I was a couple of years earlier than the moment I wanted it, for life reasons, even like having our kids in school. Our kids are still at daycare. Well, not right now because of the pandemic, but they're still at the age of being at daycare. So my plan was for it to be in 2020, and we were 2 years before 2018. And once I saw the opportunity of my organization needing space and needing some offices, and I saw a shift in the employee wellness, and I thought, hey, this is the right time. I should be doing it. I got so nervous. Like there was a full month of just me saying, this is the right time. I need to talk. I need to make a move. But I didn't feel confident because perhaps it was the FU money, or perhaps it was just faster than I had planned, or perhaps just when it comes time to take action, it's different than having it on a plan on paper. So reading up on more on those cohorts on the Mr. Money Mustache forum and seeing those people repeating, having the different offers and different perks because they were finally at that place, kept on having me talk myself back into saying, no, it's okay. Even if it doesn't work out, I know we are working, we are building, and we are working towards this. So we can find another way to have more flexibility, or we can continue with what we're doing. And at one point, we'll find something. So when I had that refusal, I thought I had options. It didn't tore me apart. Like I was down for sure. I wasn't happy. But I kept working hard, and I told myself, you know what? When the kids are in bed, I'll work on my side hustling a little more, and we'll find a way. Like perhaps I'll go into entrepreneurship sooner than I had thought, or we keep going like this and we find balance by taking more unpaid leave, or maybe I'll go part-time. Like there were a list of series of options because I kind of had done the work of seeing other people doing it, and I didn't necessarily need to depend on that specific number. I had fallbacks that I had to do the work to think about before making a move.
I love that. Having the backup plan and knowing what you would do if you get a no are really important to bolster your confidence to ask for something that you're not sure is going to be a definite yes. But also, I heard talking to people who've done it before is really important. And when I was thinking about transitioning my job to remote work, I reached out to you and you were able to talk me through what you did. And I would recommend to anyone who's thinking about doing this to reach out to people they know. You know, Miss Maud, she does consulting on this topic because she helps people who want to do this, and she knows what the typical objections are, and she knows, you know, how you can kind of propose something in a way that is showing it's a win-win to your employer. So for anything though, I think once you measure what you're going to do if they say no, and you talk to someone else and figure out, okay, what did they do to make you successful? The third piece, the third ingredient in this whole process is taking action and doing it and taking the leap, and asking for something that you're not sure is a definite yes is going to be scary. But I always remind myself, whether it's just asking for a raise in your salary, or asking for a promotion, asking for a change in benefits like working from home, or even taking the leap to leave your job and start something new. You have to take action, or you'll always wonder what would have happened if you did. You know, you could have waited, right, until 2 years. It would have been around 2020. And then maybe, you know, maybe it would be earlier this year before the whole pandemic thing happened. But maybe the response, the climate within your company would have been different. The timing wouldn't have been right. And you would always wonder, I wonder what would have happened if I asked in 2018 when I saw that opportunity. That's my recommendation to everyone. That's why I try to make these episodes really actionable. But I would really recommend learn as much as you can and be prepared. But the learning has to stop and the action has to start. Go for it when you're adequately prepared.
That's so true. Yeah, without taking action, you won't have that full confidence ever. So that whole idea on testing the waters is about taking those first action steps and getting used to creating that momentum in action. And you can go back and learn and then take another step, but you need to be taking the steps or else you'll never know.
And like you said, things are different on paper than they are in reality. You know, it can feel very emotionally different to pursue something that you feel ready for on paper. I think that's what leads a lot to the 1 more year syndrome, where you feel like, I see this number in my bank account, say it's $1 million. I have $1 million, and I had thought for 10 years that when I had $1 million, I would be good and I would feel ready. And then you look at that number and you realize it's just a number. It's not a feeling. It's not an emotion. You can't wrap a 1 and 6 zeros around yourself and feel secure. So you have to get there mentally as well as on paper. It sounds like your process really helps to take those smaller steps forward.
Absolutely. And that's been a huge reflection for ourselves, looking at our reaching our number, that idea, since we're like 5 years away. I've been asking myself a lot, what does that number even mean? Like, will that confidence come as I kind of build entrepreneurship ship ideas with like the coaching and stuff. Would that be enough? When would be the pivoting point? And there's a lot of reflections on kind of thinking, what's the core motivation behind that? What am I trying to like fight back against? We've come to the realization that for us it's feeling secure, feeling like we won't have to take on something we don't like, and we don't have to kind of have some scarcity mindset of like we have to do this or else we're kind of stuck, and having that security for our kids. But it's important to understand it. It's just a number, as you mentioned, is doesn't mean exactly something or the feeling behind it. So it's important to do that work too.
Definitely. And I think part of feeling secure in making the change once you've hit all of your criteria, which for financial independence or early retirement is typically that number, is having an idea of in your lifestyle what that money translates to. Not just running away from a job that you don't like, but moving towards something, whether it is spending all of that time with your family, or it is starting a new entrepreneurship journey, or some people just do want to lay on the beach and sip Mai Tais, and that sounds amazing. But instead of saying what I don't want, you have to start thinking, what do I want? What does this money mean to me? And what is it going to allow me to create in my life? Which is why I like to talk so much about how lifestyle design and financial independence are connected. And I feel like you and your husband have done such a deep examination of those two things, where you're still on a 10-year timeline. Is that correct? Are you still on a 10-year timeline to early retirement?
Definitely. 2025 is still on target. We're about 60 to 65% of our target amount reached. There are some things where I'm considering, like I'm doing more coaching and stuff, and I know I'll continue doing that in whenever I quit my current job. But the most important thing for us is to have that flexibility and with our kids and when we can do it. So our timeline is kind of dependent on what gives us the most flexibility at the time. But our numbers are still on target, definitely, for the 2025.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've learned more from talking to people who are pursuing FIRE, is that we don't have to necessarily work full time. And as you go on through your career, things change. And not only do you maybe end up making more money, but you could end up making money on the side. And a lot of people make money in early retirement, even though they don't really plan on it. And for a lot of people, work is a part of the retirement that they envision, some sort of meaningful work. And it doesn't have to be paid work, but usually when you're providing value, you get paid for it. So you can have, I don't want to say you can have everything, but you really can find the balance between your life and your money without having to just put your head down and kind of dislike your life and live for your work for that period of time, and then you can live your life. So that's really encouraging part of your story that I love to hear about. Could you get into a little bit about how you and Mr. Mod are also taking time off from work so that you could spend time over perhaps your summer breaks with your kids now?
Yes, we were planning on really taking like a good chunk of the summers off once our kids are in school. So that'd be in the first summer would be 2021. But in the last couple of years, we had one of our parents had cancer, and that took a lot of our time. But it also made us realize that life changes and you never know when you'll have more time with your parents and stuff like that. So once that parent got better, currently in remission, we decided we wanted to do a special trip and invite our parents over. So we looked at a plan. Initially, we thought about like 2 weeks, but as we did our research, we ended up planning for a full month trip to Mexico this January. We were really lucky in our timing considering the how the state of travel is right now, but we decided on kind of flipping our plans and doing something flexible where we rented an Airbnb. We had parents come over for a week each, and we had kind of a full week and a half, just our little family of spending time together. This was a really fun thing to plan, and it was so exciting. And we did it in a way that it would kind of fit in our budget, even though it was a good expense. It was, I'm averaging, but between like 8 to 12,000. That was about our budget for the full month, which is pretty great, thinking that we have 2 kids, so for the four of us. And it was so, so valuable to have that full month with family. And our intention going in was, we're disconnecting, we're spending time with family, and we are enjoying this time. And having planned it in that sense really, really helped to have our mindset like focused and enjoy and make the most of that full month time.
And would you call that kind of a mini retirement?
Absolutely, because we did learn a lot of things of ourselves. We had always wanted to do like maybe several months abroad. So this was testing out that idea of living abroad with kids. We rented a house there, so it was really in like a hotel setting. It was more we're kind of doing our groceries there. We're meeting people locally. We loved the amount of time that we were away. We learned that maybe not, we wouldn't go maybe for 6 months for our next trip. So that gave us insight on how to plan our next family travel. Somewhere around like 1 to 3 months is perfect. And we also met some awesome people that do this yearly, like either spend the entire winter there with their children, which I've read about. I've read blogs of people doing it, but meeting someone in person and saying, oh, okay, so are you registering the kids in a school here? How does it work? Is really insightful. And it's confidence building because you see people actually doing it and it's possible. And you just try to adapt this to your own future, and you have a lot of new opportunities to test out and to find new ways to try to see what would fit best for our family.
That sounds like a great trip, really exciting way to try things out and to spend time with people. I think that's another reason that a lot of people feel motivated to become financially independent is so that they could spend time with their family. But incorporating that into now instead of 10 or 15 years in the future means that we can spend time with maybe the older people in our lives who may not have that much time for us to spend with them. Especially now, I think, with the coronavirus happening, we've kind of all had to face our own mortality a little bit more and realize that tomorrow is not promised to us and that our relationships can't wait. You know, your kids will never be the same age they are right now. So if you were to wait, 5 or 10 more years until you could spend all day with them, it would be different than if you were able to spend a lot of your time with them now.
Absolutely. And in the same way that my dad having that flexibility and spending that time with me, I know what that left me with. So I know that my kids are watching us. And if they see us being miserable about going to work all day and just being stressed all the time, they're taking that in and they're going to see work in that perspective. I like them to see that like work is for having impact on others and also having an impact on our life, and that we use it to improve our own lifestyle and figure out what's the best way to fit all our values and all those little pieces of the puzzles that makes our life worth it and valuable and enjoyable in the current time, not in 10 years from now when we finally have worked so hard that we can reach a number and we're just like, okay, now we're done. Okay, great. I'm exhausted. And what's next? It's fun to do that work and figuring it all out on the path. It's so important.
I agree. I think that's a great place for us to end our interview and move on to the rapid fire style questions. Are you ready?
All right, ready.
Okay, so what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom to me is the ability to make choices that is the right for the balance that I need in my life.
And what would you do if you could retire right now?
I'd take kind of like a little break because the last few months have been crazy with coronavirus, having 2 kids at home, having my spouse now at home as well. I'd take like a couple of months like chilling with the kids, decluttering a bit, but then I'd get back to a routine where I can incorporate more of that coaching and making time for the things I like, but really fitting a routine that after that little break of recuperating, I feel confident with.
And what would you do if you could never retire?
I love that question. And I've actually asked that to myself, like on our path often. I would actually not change much. I keep on building my side hustling in the coaching where I say I can have an impact and share my knowledge of financial independence, that I'm just financial knowledge all around and personal finance knowledge that I was lucky to grow up with. I like to build something locally that I can help people and also virtually. So I keep working on that while I have my current job that has a lot of benefits and also flexibility and values employee wellness. And right now it's comfortable for how we want our life to look like. And I just continue working on this, eventually probably pivoting more into just the coaching and spending maybe a little less time on work. But still, I think we're doing it in a way that feels good to our needs right now. Making time for our kids, making time for us, and making time to have the impact we can have on the world.
And if you could go back in time, what one piece of financial or lifestyle advice would you give yourself in your early 20s?
I would tell myself to do the hard work of figuring out what are my values, what makes me happy. I had to do a few mistakes to figure out what I need right now and what's more valuable in terms of time, my energy. Really, that hard work will direct where your spending goes. And when you look at the core behind your true spending, you figure out that most of those things are easily addressed with perhaps activities that don't cost a lot. And when you look at the true reasons behind why you're doing big expenses and such, a lot of times you could just address this in a way that it turns back to time and the value of your relationships and the value of the time you have right now. And I saw a really good quote. I don't remember at all who wrote it, but it was about if you had any regrets on your life, and it went something like, I wouldn't change a thing except maybe I'd open my eyes wider when at certain times. And like it's all about this focus, like what we need right now and what makes us happy.
Thank you, Miss Maud. That's such insightful advice to give to yourself in your early 20s, and I think we can all learn from that. I'd like to live my life with my eyes open a little bit wider. Where can everyone go to learn more about you and your story?
So there's my blog. It's modestmillionaires.com. I'm also at Twitter, Mod Millionaires. And I haven't been on Instagram in a while, but I always plan on doing a little bit more there. And yeah, so that's the main places.
Great. And we'll link to all of that in the show notes. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
To check out the show notes for this episode, which includes links to resources mentioned in today's interview and where you can go to learn more about Miss Maud, go to 20free.co/episode 22. I want this to be more than just a podcast for listening to, so I'm making it a do-cast, where you're getting information from the podcast that you can take action on to create real outcomes in your life. I call these power moves. If you implement even one of these tactics into your life, you're taking a powerful step towards finding your freedom. What are some power moves we learned from this conversation? Here are 6. Power move number 1. Fit your work around your life. You've heard that saying, do you live to work or work to live? Ms. Maud shares with us how her father started on a path to entrepreneurship that allowed him to create a flexible work schedule so his work could fit around his life, rather than the other way around. This had a profound impact on her as a child, who got to spend time with her father during lunch and after school every day. Now that she has her own kids, she has negotiated her job so that her work can fit around her life, and this allows her to spend a lot of time with her kids as well. This kind of lifestyle design allows you to create balance and spend time on what you truly value. Power move number 2. Be a role model. Ms. and Mr. Maud are role modeling their approach to balancing family and work to their children. We already talked about how impactful Ms. Maud's experience with her father's flexible work schedule was. Role modeling your values and taking action on what you think is important can also help you get a spouse on board with pursuing financial independence. After a year of trying to get Mr. Maud on board, Ms. Maud created an early retirement plan for herself and presented it to her husband. This got Mr. Maud on board because he felt left out. He saw that it was possible for her to retire early and started to feel more motivated because he needed to return to work after paternity leave. By living the values that you believe in and making plans to incorporate those things into your life, you can influence your family and friends by being a good role model. This shows them what is possible and the positive consequences of your actions. Power move number 3, don't defer your life. Traditional retirement is a deferred life plan where you put off everything you want to do until you're done working completely. The standard early retirement has historically looked like a condensed deferred life plan. Most early retirees lack balance in their approach to working versus enjoying life on their journey to financial independence. Ms. Maud didn't want to defer her life. Her and her husband knew that they could have waited 10 years until they were retired to have kids, but they didn't want to defer that important part of their lives. Ms. Maud is proof that you can fire in 10 years even if you have kids, and better yet, that you can build a lot of flexibility into your lifestyle on the journey to fire. This 10-year plan even includes summers off, long-term travel, and working from home. They were able to account for this flexibility by removing all salary increases from their projections. It is so important to make sure that you aren't deferring your life until after financial independence or early retirement. Time is a non-renewable resource, and our parents and our kids will never be the same age they are today. We won't be in our 20s or 30s forever, so we need to live in this time as fully as possible. Power move number 4, don't wait, create. This is a personal motto of mine that inspires me to create opportunities instead of just waiting for them to come along. By being an active participant in crafting your own job description, creating your own hours, or developing your own dream job, you can get where you want to be so much faster. Maybe it's because I'm impatient, but I don't see the point in waiting for something to come along at the end of a journey when I could put the pieces in place to make it happen now. Ms. Maud created an awesome opportunity for herself by pitching her remote arrangement to her employers several years before she had planned when she saw an opening. She got the idea by seeing that others who were handing in their early retirement notices were being offered remote work arrangements when they were ready to leave. Rather than waiting to have enough FU money or waiting to be ready to retire to put herself in the position to be offered a remote work opportunity, she created this opportunity for herself. If you've been waiting for an opportunity to land in your lap, think about what action you can take right now to create it for yourself so you can stop waiting. Power move number 5, make it a win-win. Whenever you want to ask for something, it helps to frame the request as a win-win scenario where all parties benefit. Particularly when you're asking an employer for something, you want to frame the request in light of what the benefits are to the company. It's great if working from home will help make you happier and save you a bunch of time from your commute. But if you want to sell upper management on it, you need to quantify why happier employees are good for their bottom line. Since happiness is tied to higher productivity, that's the benefit to really showcase in your proposal. This same advice applies to asking for a raise or promotion as well. Besides talking about benefits, you want to make sure that you address any specific concerns that might arise. Make sure your employer knows that what they might see as a negative is actually a positive. For example, Ms. Maud explained that it was actually easier for her to make client calls while working from home because she didn't have to waste time trying to find an open meeting room at her office. In the end, make sure your proposal shows clearly that this move is a win-win for everyone involved, particularly the employer. Power move number 6, one step at a time. When you're proposing a big shift in your work arrangements, like asking to work from home full-time, take it one step at a time. Don't jump into a full proposal and presentation. First, float the idea past your manager in a casual conversation. Inquire about how your performance has been while working from home, and see if they have any feedback. Then, set a sit-down meeting with a more formal proposal or presentation. Be prepared to give this proposal to upper management as well. Testing the waters creates momentum and helps you take small action steps that lead to big changes. You don't have to jump all into remote work either. You could take it step by step. First, start with 1 or 2 days a week working from home. Then, move to only 1 day in the office per week before you start working from home full time. This can help ensure a smooth transition and give everyone the confidence that your performance is actually better during the days that you work from home than the days that you're in the office. Making a big change isn't going to happen overnight, but by taking it one step at a time, you will be moving consistently towards your goal. That is the 6th and final power move from my conversation with Miss Maud from Modest Millionaires about negotiating a full-time work-from-home position. Do you need help figuring out what's next on your path to finding your freedom? Let's work together. As a money coach and lifestyle design expert, I help people reach their biggest money goals, like paying off debt, building up savings, and using their money to create their ideal life. As your money coach, I help you gain clarity about what freedom looks like for you, develop a strategy to get there, and overcome your money roadblocks on the path to financial and lifestyle freedom. People work with me because they want to finally feel good about their finances and have a stress-free plan to create a life they love. And they don't want to spend years using trial and error and disjointed advice from the internet to figure out how to make it happen. I provide the proven tools to improve your finances and accountability to make sure that you take the action needed to change your life. If you want to take the concepts you are learning on this podcast to the next level, visit 20free.co/moneycoaching to schedule your free 10-minute call with me. I can't wait to help you transform your life and find your freedom. Need someone to talk with about recent changes in your finances due to COVID-19? Let's connect on a free 10-minute coaching call and discuss how I can help. Schedule your call today at the word 20free.co/moneycoaching. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you're subscribed to the Find Your Freedom podcast on whatever app you're using to listen to this episode. Do me a favor and also leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Go to 20free.co/iTunes to be redirected to the page on Apple Podcasts where you can leave your rating and review. I really appreciate it. If you think this episode would help someone you know, please share it with a friend. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Find Your Freedom podcast. My name is Becky. You can connect with me on Instagram and Twitter at 20freeco and sign up for free resources and email updates at www.20free.co. That's the word 20, FREE.co. I'll talk to you next week on another episode of the Find Your Freedom podcast.